You're listening to the Behind Every Employer podcast with your hosts Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. On the Behind Every Employer podcast, we sit down with future-focused employers and innovators who are advancing talent development for the frontline workforce that drives business. These leaders are challenging the status quo of education and training and delivering scalable solutions. Discussions cross the intersections of adult education, digital resiliency, training innovations, and other topics important to the new American workforce. This podcast is being brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education and sponsored by NGen, a carefree-focused virtual English language platform for organizations and employers working with immigrants and refugees. Listen to the Behind Every Employer podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and you can find us at coa.org. And now, here are your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz.
Hey, how's it going, Jeff? Good to see you.
It is going great. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I love the new intro and the new splice there. It's great.
We're getting it together. It took us a few weeks, took us a minute, but we're getting together.
Absolutely. Well, I love. This is going to be a fun episode because we're mixing it up.
Definitely are.
You're going to be in the interview seat here with our wonderful guest today. And I'm going to be the one chiming in on the side. So I really love this and happy to get started here. I was going to ask you, just what's on your mind? You know, we've been had a lot going on recently out there, and you're traveling, I think, aren't you?
So I'm traveling. I'm in New Mexico right now. I'm looking over the mountains. You can't see them behind that brick wall right there, but yeah. I'm looking at the mountains, and I have to tell you, I've been traveling a lot, but you're going to be the first to know. Is that I'm actually leaving my position and I'm going to start building bridges. I'm building bridges.
Oh, right.
So I've been working on the infrastructure bill and trying to convince people how important it is to get people educated and skilled up so that they can get some of these infrastructure jobs that are hopefully going to be coming down over the next few years. So going across the country, really talking to adult educators, and here in New Mexico doing the same. But it's been remarkable, really well received, but really opening people's eyes up to the future of work and looking at what jobs are going to be coming down the pike in the near future. So tell me, what's been on your radar screen?
Well, you know, this is when this airs, it's going to be a few weeks afterwards, but I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and my thoughts are with the individuals out in Uvalde, Texas, about 80 miles away from me. The campus violence and campus security issues, you know, are something that are just an all too common reoccurrence. And this one hits close to home. One of my most favorite bosses of my career was from Uvalde. He worked for Governor Dolph Briscoe, taught me the ropes of Texas politics, and then, you know, Uvalde is the town. You know, everybody comes to San Antonio to go big shopping, and from Uvalde, so it's a very close town to us. And I think it just reminds us, from university level all the way down to our elementary schools, unfortunately, that campus security is something so critical. I remember when I was managing campus on the west side of San Antonio, it was a big issue for us. You know, this was a school building that had multiple entranceways. We had big discussions about which ones would be open, which would be closed. Fortunately, we had campus security on site, but it was always on my mind when I was steward of a campus, that this was something that could happen in our area. And so every time I see it, it just kind of hits home extra close for us. But it's just something else that educators need to be vigilant on, and our business community, of course, in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Our hearts and prayers goes out to all the families and the community that have been touched by all this. Anson, if it's okay with you, I think maybe let's just take a break and just everybody just take a few seconds on your own and just think about how precious life is, and we'll be right back. We're here at Behind Every Employer. We'll be right back, everybody.
You're listening to the Behind Every Employer podcast with your hosts Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz.
We are back, and we are back with a very good friend. And Jeff Korzenik, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Delighted to be with you.
So great. Jeff is a chief investment strategist at one of the largest banks in our country and oversees $40 billion in assets. He's been doing it for so long, for years. Jeff is a frequent guest on CNBC, on Fox Business, Bloomberg TV. He's all over the place, but I think he's most famous, and the reason he's on this show is for putting me graciously in his book, Untapped Talent, which came out in April 2021.
Awesome.
And Jeff's a graduate of Princeton. He lives down in Florida. And we're so grateful to have you on the show. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Jeff, thank you for your help in translating your lived experience to something that employers can understand and help them understand that people who have exited incarceration are, by the time they are ready to be applying for a job, have stabilized their housing, built up skills to apply, use technology, really prove that they are people of determination and character. And when you understand that reentry journey, it really helps employers. So thank you for being so open and sharing your experience.
Yeah, so I was glad for that. So we met several years ago, and just so people know, this wasn't an overnight project. You developed a passion. You were in the banking industry, and then for some reason, I need to understand this better because I still never. Some reason, all of a sudden, you got this this passion for criminal justice and the justice space. And can you tell us a little bit how that all got started?
It's in some ways it's broader than the criminal justice space. It's my belief that everyone in our country should have the opportunity to contribute and live lives of meaning. And it started for me back around 2013 when exploring, part of my responsibilities are to understand what's going on in the economy. And we were talking back in 2013 about how many people were missing from the labor force, and particularly notably young men, others as well. And I started digging into this and talking to people in communities that we bank. I work for a bank, and talking to employers. And I came to understand that we had social ills of such a magnitude that have developed over the last 10 or 20 or 30 years or more, that they had become actually economic and workforce issues. And once you start digging in, I started with the opioid epidemic, and quickly came to understand that having the impact of the justice system was more than this obscure social ill. It was an actual macroeconomic issue holding back our growth. So that's kind of the economic side. The other side of it is, I'm the son and grandson of immigrants. This country has been the land of second chances for my family. And I think everyone should have the ability to move past mistakes or tragedies in their past and be able to build up their lives.
Yeah. So what's incredible about all this, Jeff, is that you took a problem which we've kind of pushed under the carpet for a long time, which was really, what happens to men and women when they go through our justice system and then come out. And there's a harsh reality when you look at the numbers. We spend $60 billion on men and women in our justice systems and keeping them incarcerated, and all the prisons and jails we keep open. And yet we have about a 60%, 66% recidivism rate around the country, where people are finding their way back behind the walls. And so we spend $60 billion and we fail 2/3 of the time. It just doesn't make economic sense to us, does it?
Yeah, no, I always say we have a stupid criminal justice system because it doesn't end up promoting public safety, and it doesn't offer pathways to rehabilitation. So it's failing in its most basic missions, not intentionally, just that's where we've ended up.
So it's interesting because, first I have this question. It's kind of a hard one, but I'm going to throw it to you. Is, you're in the banking industry. Was there any pushback from the banking industry? Like, you want us to hire, people that just serve time, and they describe many people as ex-cons and ex-felons, and they use those harsh words. Was there any pushback in the industry for you jumping in this pool?
There absolutely has been some, but I'm fortunate to work for an institution, and I should say that this work is largely outside of the institution. Sometimes it crosses because it's part of the economic story, but a lot of this work is independent and required my employer to provide me with, to agree to allow me to do this under kind of the rules of engagement in the industry. Okay. But I will also say that I started approaching this talking about the opioid epidemic, and the bank I work for has a very heavy presence in places where the opioid epidemic really blossomed first. That Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky. And so it was meaningful to our customers.
Sure.
And I would start talking about this as an economic issue, and I would have people coming up to me from the audience, speak in front of hundreds of people at a time, and, tens of thousands of people probably over the course of a year. And people were coming up to me and telling me stories from their lives. And I think that helped because it was something our customers were clearly relating to. And then it became evident. I was talking about the opioid epidemic as a true economic problem. That was radical at the time. And then it became apparent through the work of people like the late Professor Alan Kruger of Princeton and others. And so places like Bloomberg TV started turning to me a lot to talk about the economics of this. So it became very, very credible. And then moving on to Second Chance and the employment of people with criminal records, it was a natural transition. I built up some credibility. And in fact, I've been very fortunate. The bank has at times embraced this. We've done panels in different cities where I'll feature a second chance employer and maybe a policy person, and to get in front of the business audiences that we talk to and have a line of communication to. So it's worked really well. And then, of course, a competitor bank, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, has been very public about this. And that also kind of put people at ease that this was a legitimate issue for bankers to be talking about.
Yeah, I actually just met with JP Morgan Chase last week, and we were talking about their investment in dollars to try and see how they can help get men and women back to work. So you actually, like in researching this book, you did more than just make some phone calls and read some articles. You went on this national tour, and it was pretty crazy because you did come to Philadelphia. And I'm going to share a story with you later on in the podcast of one of the things that happened. But can you tell us a little about the tour, what you learned?
Yeah, I'm kind of a dog with a bone. Once I see a problem and I see some potential for a solution, I don't let go of it. And I was very fortunate to start coming across some employers early on. First, some nonprofits like the King's Kitchen in Charlotte that help people rehabilitate themselves and get back into the workforce. And then I was very fortunate to meet with Nehemiah Manufacturing, which is becoming sort of a legendary second chance employer. 150 of their 220 team members are second chance. And Dan Meyer, the CEO of that, has just been a tremendous advocate for this and is a very thoughtful business leader. And he really articulated the business case. So I started reaching out and finding employers around the country. And being a banker actually helped because very often our regional presidents would know the CEOs of these companies. So I get access. And I started searching them out. And when I'd have business trips, so I was in Philadelphia to speak at an event that was being held at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank, I would look up people and get to know people around the country. And then later on, if I couldn't tie it into a business trip, I would fly on my own dime, of course. And even in the middle of the pandemic, early months like June of April or May of 2020, right? Very early in the pandemic, I needed to go visit a company. So I got on a plane. I was, an empty plane and weird trying to find a hotel that was open and all that. But the employer is in manufacturing because of what they are tied into. They were considered an essential industry. They were working. Bankers are considered essential employees. We were working. And so I just toured the country finding these employers. And the real breakthrough started coming early that I realized all these employers, different parts of the country, different industries, the ones who were having success had come up with the same model. And so I started talking about the model and formalizing the structure of how you talk about the model, and with the intent of making it easier for other employers to do this and have success.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting too that you've got this, uneven distribution of kind of like know-how on the private sector side. And then you see the same thing, of course, on the public side with schools and colleges. That's where I kind of cut my teeth on this when I was managing the campus on the west side of San Antonio. About 58 to 60% of our students that were coming in for workforce training had some sort of justice involvement in their past. And when we initially started program offerings, we noticed immediately that we were having to exclude so many of these individuals because we had occupational tracks that were tied to jobs that required certain levels of, clean record, a lot of it in healthcare and stuff like that. And we started doing this soul searching, like how can we be turning away 60% of our students that are coming in for training? And I mean, it just hit us like, a 2x4 in terms of needing to retool our approach. And we started by going to businesses. And fortunately, I had some really good experts with me that were really good with working not only with talking about, this with our employers, but also working with the judges on expunging records and things like that. But I just realized, like, here this is a large part of San Antonio, this community, and here we were trying to open a campus in the middle of it, and realized that this problem just did not have a clear strategy on either end, and yet it was representing 60% of students that were wanting to change their lives, that were coming into a school building looking for training. So I think with as long as this topic has been and how much press it gets, when I was in state government, it's always on, elected officials' minds, but we still have so far to go on so many fronts. It's just astounding to me.
Yeah, who I think has been missing from the conversation is the business community.
Yeah. Yes.
And because that's where you can work on reducing some of these professional licensing barriers. Yep. You can get money behind some of the lobbying and advocacy for changing some of our regulatory restrictions on people who've made a past mistake and paid their dues. And I guess I approached this by working the problem backwards, because I didn't know any other way. And I said, if we can get employers to understand that this is a population that shouldn't be overlooked, and in fact, because of our demographically driven labor shortage, has to be considered,
yes.
Then I think we'll get a lot of the rest right. And if employers truly understood how badly we treat their future workforce, this population, they'd never stand for it. And I think we're coming around to understand that, and that this is a group of individuals that are worthy of investment, not warehousing.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, Jeff, you talked about the model. So can you share with us, like, what's the secret sauce? Like, we got employers listening to this. They're going to want to hear. Go for it.
In a funny way, it's nothing new. It's you have to have a process for figuring out who's a good fit and ready to be a good employee for your enterprise. And then you have to give them the tools to thrive. The challenge is that this is a population that has issues that are different from your traditional hire. Some are related to the criminal justice system, like you might need flex time to meet a parole officer, or you better know the conditions of parole. Just as a quick aside, there's a terrible story that was related to me by the CEO of a construction company in Indianapolis, where he gave someone a chance, turned into a great employee, so good that he asked him to go on an out-of-state job site that really required some attention and a good employee. And the employee was so grateful for the job opportunity and so committed to his employer, he didn't tell him that he was not permitted to leave the state.
Yeah.
He ended up being violated and going back to prison. And so employers need to know how this stuff works and what might impact their workers, because as you know, a lot of the population of people who've been justice impacted don't have a lot of mentorship in their lives, may not have had a strong history of employment, so they don't know how to navigate this. So the employers have to meet them. So some of the things you need to do are related to that. Some of it might be more related to deep poverty, lack of experience and coaching. People might need assistance with transportation or housing. The employer doesn't have to provide these. They just have to have a network and people who can help their employees navigate to those resources.
And that's the biggest thing in the reentry space. It's not about finding people a job. I think there's a lot of jobs out there. It's helping people really steer towards a career. And oftentimes men and women come home and we say, oh, just get a job, just get a job. We'll take anything, just take anything. And not recognizing that that's really the problem. It can't be, I'll take anything. It's really got to be, what are you passionate about? What do you want to really do? And that's where the value that talent pipeline really starts to build.
That's right. And now I'm going to put on my economist hat for a sec and say an economic growth is founded on two things and two things alone. How fast can you grow your workforce? So that means We want to make sure we're not overlooking anyone and getting them in the workforce. But it also means the other factor is productivity. So it's how fast can you grow your workforce and how fast can you grow your workers' productivity. Workforce productivity is directly tied to economic mobility. The ability to move up to other jobs, other roles, other companies that are allowing you to contribute more and more, a worker to contribute more and more to the economy. That's what you need to help us grow better as an economy, and we'll all benefit from that.
Right.
So the last 2 years, we've seen all this. We've seen, well, right now we're going through it. We're seeing the struggle of finding talent, right? And we're seeing more and more employers. I'm wondering, what are you seeing in the corporate world? What are you seeing with the employers that you're meeting with? And how are they changing? And what perspective are they now having on those people maybe they weren't going to give a chance to a few years ago? They putting them back in the pool. We opening that door?
Yeah, we are slowly but surely. It's funny because I'm a data guy. Going into this, I had a measure I was going to use to judge whether we have success or aren't having success. And I chose, rightly or wrongly, but I think it's a pretty good proxy for success, is to look at the labor force participation rate of young males, 25 to 34-year-old young men. Labor force participation is how many people are in the workforce as a percentage of the population. And I chose the young males because that's where the problems were centered. That's where opioid and other drug addiction is centered. That's where rates of justice involvement tend to be greatest. That's where educational attainment tends to be missing the mark. Too many men don't get college degrees, for instance. Not that everyone should go that path, but it's noticeable that it's missing. And that's where we've had the most noticeable sort of missing amount of workers. I'm thrilled to say that as of the last labor report, the young male participation rate is back up to pre-pandemic highs. So it's the big success story out there. We still have a long way to go because it was falling since 2000 or before, but we're seeing progress. On the ground, what that looks like is people are interested in my work. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, for sure. They're interested in your work and they're interested in the men and women that I work with. They're opening those doors up, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't receive at least 1 or 2 calls from an employer saying, we need to know a little bit more, like, what should we be doing? How should we be thinking about this? And really understanding. And that means even looking at some of the things that are really swinging in with diversity, equity, inclusion of job descriptions. And, maybe you don't need a college degree, to drive that truck around and make some deliveries for you. Right. And they're really looking at some of those things.
We've been our own worst enemies in the business community. We've had set up this process that is based on excluding people instead of looking to include. And to your point, I give as the example, Delta Airlines recently dropped the requirement that their pilots have to have bachelor's degrees. They just want people who can fly a plane. As a regular Delta flyer, that's all I care about too.
Yeah. It's so true about these fundamentals, the job description. And I would say too, and we see this with other populations, the application. You have these binary choices on the application. We see it for high school, no high school, college, no college. And of course you see criminal history questions. And then of course, when you have automated screening for resumes and stuff, how you set that screen is including, there's not even a discussion with the individual. And I have just learned that those are things that employers, they're not even thinking about until you tell them, do you realize that you're possibly excluding 50% of your applications based on criteria that really aren't things that you think are important. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
No, so I'm out there telling that to employers.
Yes.
Wonderful. It came about because of the electronic nature today of applications. I'm really going to date myself. Back in the day, you'd have a job opening. I'd be a manager looking to fill an opening. I'd get 10 resumes. How do you sort through 10 resumes? Well, 5 would have cover letters. The 5 that didn't, you throw them out. 1 misspelled your name. You throw that one out, and you're down to a couple that you can manage. I spoke in Dallas recently. An employer said our typical job opening pre-pandemic, we get 400 applications because people have it set up. So we got in the habit, a very sloppy habit, of let's set up criteria, whether they matter or not, to just winnow that down.
Yep.
And the silver lining about the labor shortage is that in the case of this employer, for that one opening, they got 3 applications now, not 400. So they're going to look at each one. But we can do it better than that. We can improve these processes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have so Jeff's book is Untapped Talent. It's how second chance hiring works for your business and the community, and it's on bookshelves. It's been on bookshelves. I keep a dozen copies at home because I give it wherever I go, and I tag the pages that I'm on so they can see it. But I wanted to tell you just a quick story before we get into something else, and I never told you this. So when I became an executive director, I obviously have a colonel background. People are very transparent about it. And I just gotten hired. It wasn't that long that I was a director. And you invited me to speak to one of your speaking engagements. And it was at it was a big banking summit that you spoke at. There were bankers from around the world that were there. And you happened to call me out from the audience for the work that I was doing with reentry and justice. And about a week or two later, I got called from our CEO of a company, and he said, you've been with us a little while, and I think that it's time for you to tell your story to the board of directors. And we have a very large board of directors. I went in front of the board of directors, and I told my story, and I got done telling the story, and I said, if anyone has any questions, I'm very open. And one gentleman stood up, and he said, I just want you to know one thing. And I have to tell you the story. He said, I was at a huge bankers conference, and I heard this gentleman, very well-recognized banker, up on the stage speaking about second chance employment. And they mentioned Jeff Abramowitz and the company that I was working for. And he said, from that minute on, I knew we had gotten the right guy.
Love that.
Well, your reputation would have been sterling without me, but if I helped get it
was great.
Up front a little faster than it would normally have, I'm really happy for that.
It was one of those moments, those aha moments for me. I was like, oh my gosh. So we've seen a lot happen Jeff, in second chances. We're seeing a lot of, there has been a lot of movement, a lot of change. We're talking about a lot of this in the industry, and we're seeing companies now open the door up a little bit wider. I'm curious, what advice do you give employers that are looking to dive into the pool?
The most important pieces of advice if they've made the decision that they want to explore this, the most important piece of advice is you have to do it the right way. Don't view this as, and one thing that scares me, frankly, as someone who cares about these issues, so I'm afraid that some employers will view this as, quote unquote, lowering their standards. It's not about that. It's finding talent from people who've had different life experiences than your traditional talent pool. Yep. Because if you don't go looking for talent, you're not going to find it. And if you start out with that kind of defeatist approach, it's ultimately unsustainable. If I was in Houston a couple months ago, and an employer, it was not the time or place to get into this in a deeper way, but the employer was saying, yeah, we work with the Texas Workforce Board, and we've got like a 95% turnover with this population. There are some diamonds there, but for the most part, not. And I'm thinking, you're a businessman and a successful one. You built your life perfecting processes. You think you could do something here? And employers like that, employers have to know you have to approach this with intention, and you have to invest some time and self-education to do this right. But I'll stress, it's an investment. It's not a cost. There's a payoff here of highly engaged, loyal employees. Yes. And but my fear is, so back to your question, my message to employers is, I've been saying for a long time, you should try this, but try it the right way.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's needed too is, back to our earlier discussion, there's just a dearth of expertise in terms of helping employers develop a model, the technical assistance to figure that out. We see the same thing with immigrants and refugees. Employers have very diverse views of, and it's mainly based on the fact that they would like to hire them. They just don't know exactly how and what they need to be doing to not have those retention issues and things like that. Yeah, because the labor market is commanding it right now. There's just a need for any staff member you can find that you can hire. And when you're turning them away without really sufficient, screening and sufficient like feedback, you're just shooting yourself in the foot in terms of trying to help your retention and your sourcing metrics.
That the beauty of embracing second chance hiring and learning to do it right is if you can find a workforce solution for a young man, in North Philadelphia who was convicted of a crime of violence, but is not a violent person. There's a difference.
Yep.
Suddenly, as an employer, you can figure out veterans, returning parents who've left for 10 years, immigrant populations. You can figure it all out because the structure is essentially the same.
Right.
You meet employees where they are and you figure it out from there.
So you did this tour and you wrote the book, and in the back of the book, it's remarkable that you have a lot of resources for people, which is really awesome, because there's a lot of things that you can go to for employers and to really look at things that could help you in that whole process. But is there a story or two that sticks out in your mind that everything kind of clicked? And I'll tell you one that you actually started. You made this referral to me, but are there any that stick out in your mind that's aha moment, like we got something here that's really impactful?
In terms of employers, yeah. Well, the minute I walked in the door of Nehemiah Manufacturing, I knew. And in fact, for your listeners who may not be familiar with Nehemiah, one of the things that all these employers had told me along the years is no academic studies had ever been done of their work. Nehemiah was a breakthrough because in 2018, Harvard Business School sent a team down and did a business study. They updated it in 2020. It's a case study. It's now required reading for all Harvard MBA candidates. Wow. So it's just an awesome breakthrough. And I have to credit Dan Meyer, the founder, for that, because he's a Wharton grad. Wharton people tend to be numbers people. He expressed it in such a concrete way that I could grasp that and said, there's a business case here.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So I'll give you the one. You introduced me to somebody named Brandon Cheskowski, and Brandon runs a 5-star restaurant in Cleveland called Edwin's. And actually, Brandon and I are now very good friends. And Brandon happened to be out in Cleveland. My partner's daughter lives out there, and we went out for dinner before the COVID. Went out for dinner there, and there was so the story is pretty simple. I actually have the slide and the picture that I take everywhere I go. It's one of the standard slides I end with, because it's of a gentleman that made us bananas Foster for dessert that night. And I haven't had bananas Foster in a long time, but I have to say it's probably the best bananas Foster I ever ate in my life. But that really wasn't why I showed the picture. I showed the picture because this gentleman had a smile on his face when he got done making this dish in front of us. That was as if he had just scored the winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. And it was such accomplishment. And I was like, if I could get that smile and that look on his face on every student that I work with, that would be success to me. That really would be.
I love Edwin's because they are daily proof to the public that second chance doesn't mean second rate. And that is a fear. I mean, that's one of the objections you hear. There's this perception that if you're hiring people with records, it means they must be somehow suboptimal employees. And Edwin's stands as living proof that you can have excellence from this population. And in fact, I think you have disproportionate amounts of excellence because of the commitment you get from his students and employees.
Jeff, and Anson, I need you to chime in on this. So one of the things Anson and I are we're joined at the hip on this one, is the importance of digital literacy in our world. And I was wondering if you could talk for a minute, maybe Anson, you could set the table a little bit about digital literacy and its importance.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it seems to come up on almost every episode. And it is just one of these things where we're at such a great confluence of federal funding that's coming out that's tied to the Infrastructure Act, tied to digital equity, and tied to reaching populations kind of most in need of digital access. Immigrant, second language learners, those justice involved individuals that sometimes are exiting and have been kind of had the whole digital world blow them by, blow by them. They did not know what an ATM machine sometimes coming out, and now they're faced with having to apply for jobs and stuff online only. And so it's just become this great situation where we bring this resource of money that's coming out from the federal government, which is, of course, really activating our schools and our adult education programs across the country to really address this need. And I think with the second chance population, it's a different approach in some ways. They've just been sometimes completely removed from the digital world. And so much has changed even the last 5 years. We're not talking about, long-term issues. These are things that have evolved so quickly. Jobs have become so much more automated. Fast food, everywhere you go, there's digital interfaces and digital equipment. So I think it's definitely something that deserves its own approach for the second chance population, and it becomes like a critical workforce development piece.
Oh, absolutely. And training is now digital too.
Yes.
I just before he was working on one of our training updates, and it's digital. So everything. So it becomes this chicken and the egg. How can you train someone if your training is digital to start with, unless they've gotten a leg up? And again, my whole philosophy is if we can get the business community engaged. I know, say, Checker Foundation out in San Francisco. My friend Ken Oliver is the CEO of that, and he's got a push to get tech companies involved in second chance hiring. That will flow down. And of course, you have great nonprofits like the Last Mile. When I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago or so, speaking at the San Francisco Chamber, it was an economic talk, but I talked a little bit about second chance, and I had a leader of a very significant international architecture firm who wants to create pathways for justice-involved individuals, starting with training in prisons. And I'm making some connections, and we'll see where it goes. But again, if the business community can grasp this, and they're good at it, getting stuff done. But my job in this whole thing is just to make sure the business community is aware this labor shortage is not going away. So we have to rethink our talent strategies, and you can't overlook anyone.
Awesome.
Yeah, one thing I would ask probably both of you, because you come out from different directions, but I think one of the things that really does help hook the business community are the tax incentives that are available, like the work opportunity tax credit and things like that are federal programs that provide tax relief for companies that hire individuals that are justice involved, as well as other populations. Can either of y'all speak to that in terms of how that could be a good lever in terms of getting the employer community excited and interested to get on this journey?
Can I push back on that a little bit? Sorry, Jeff. I didn't mean to.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Those are good things, but the risk is that you get employers who are only interested in that.
Yeah.
It's a tool for someone who is already committed to help fund the training and development.
Right.
And I was just on the Zoom call the other day with a gentleman formerly incarcerated in Arizona, and he's a professional who's been very successful. He had a fortunate path out because he retained such a strong social capital, a social network. Right. But he said when he was in whatever correctional facility he was in, they would teach them to emphasize the federal bonding program, right, which protects employers against the first $5,000. Right. And when I think no one's ever asked the employers what they think of that, because when I mentioned that to employers early on, they'd laugh and say, "It's not the first $5,000 loss I'm worried about. It's
exactly.
The multi-million-dollar negligent hiring liability. It's someone destroying $1 million piece of equipment." So I think those are beneficial. Don't get me wrong, but I never lead with them. I lead with, here's the pathway to highly engaged and loyal employees.
Yep. Yeah, I am the same, although I think it's important to call it out. I do think there are also some state benefits and some programs that are really pretty cool where they can get some state benefit. I mean, I've seen a recent program where the employer and the state split the first 3 months of pay And it was an incentive to see if it's going to work or not. And it reduced their risks. And they had a remarkable retention rate in that program. That's because the employer gave them the opportunity and the state gave them, they're sort of cutting their losses and trying to find that talent pool. And I'm okay with stuff like that where they're incentivizing it. But yeah, I don't think either one of those are really a game changer. And I also don't think like the Second Chance Act nor the Second Chance Pell are going to change much in the world. The Second Chance Act really affects a very small 2% of the entire justice population. And so I think, while I'm going to talk a little bit later about some federal stuff, but in my lightning round. So I think those are important. Those are important things. I often I think about a lot of things when it comes to employment and retention, and I so appreciate the work you're doing in this space. I think we need more people that are in banking industries and really looking at the financial benefit. I do, and I'm looking really hard right now to try and get a study funded on the return of investment for hiring someone that's been justice impacted. And I think, money on Capitol Hill and in legislators often talks. And if you can really show a return on investment, not only just keeping them out of prison, but how about all the welfare rolls and all those other things and how about, and then the intangible, the generational stuff in their family. Wow.
You help one person, you're helping four people, right? You're helping four, and that's just the first generation. And I don't see how we break these cycles of intergenerational poverty in the United States unless we have pathways for second chance hiring. And I like to, maybe impolitely chide my friends in the DEI community, and I remind them that the ugly truth of the justice system is that it has not fallen equally on all communities. And 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction. Yep. And so you don't have a DEI program unless you have a pathway for second chance hiring, because your workforce will never reflect your population.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
That's a great point.
So Jeff, how can we get your book, Untapped Talent? How can we get it?
Amazon.com. You can order it through local booksellers, Barnes and Nobles. It's out there. I have to tell you, and forgive me for taking up a moment's time. Sure. When the book came out, that's kind of your big push, and then it goes pretty quiet. And I was disappointed, but there was a lot of noise. Something is going on, and I don't know what it is, because I've long since, publicists are, those contracts are long over. Every day, at least every weekday, business day, the book appears in its subcategory in Amazon, in at least one of its subcategories. It appears in the top 100 bestsellers. So it's actually gaining momentum, even though it's been out for a little bit over a year. And so I'm really excited about it.
It's just because I'm taking it everywhere, Jeff. I'm taking it to every conference I go to, of course. You got to get 12 copies. I got to start getting royalties on this darn thing. That's what it is. So we're going to, Jeff Korzenik, Untapped Talent. Thank you so much for being here and being with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with our infamous lightning round. So you're listening to Behind Every Employer. Jeff and Anson, we'll be right back. Back. Well, that was a smooth transition. We're gonna have to take care of that a little bit, but that was we are back. It's our lightning round. I guess that was lightning striking, throwing us back right in there with a bolt of lightning. And again, Jeff Korzenik has been great. This is lightning round. So, Anson, you want to kick it off? You want me to? Which one? You guys?
I will, and I'll end here with my call to action where I began the show, which is really charging our employer community, our schools, to go and look at their security protocols. The events in Uvalde remind us of how fragile those can be. And it is something that is at a team level, but also, of course, at your executive level in terms of strategy. And we all have strategies. We all have safety plans. Our schools definitely do, but it's got to be something that we first off remind ourselves about, but then maybe rethink what we've done, or look for sloppiness maybe in our procedures that we've kind of let our guard down on, because we have got to do our part in securing our customers, our students, when they're in our facilities and in our workplaces. And the events in Uvalde just reminded us all of how these things can just completely tear up a community and a nation, honestly.
Yeah, that's a bolt. That's a bolt. Thanks, Anson. Jeff, you want to give us a lightning bolt?
Yeah, I'm going to give you my pet peeve that what we're going through in the workforce today has been termed the Great Resignation. That sounds like it's just revolving, chairs, and sooner or later everyone will come back just at a different company. That's wrong. It was the Great Retirement.
Yep.
The St. Louis Fed estimated last year by October that 2.4 million Americans had retired early, and some will come back, but most will not. This workforce shortage is here to stay. We got 11 million job openings in the U.S., 6 million job seekers. Even if all those seekers found jobs, we're still short 5 million. Employers have to face up to this and change their practices.
And those employers in healthcare, construction, manufacturing, they have been talking about that for 20 years, about this upcoming retirement. And I'm with you. No one said that was it. We saw it happen, not like gradually, but people just said, that's it. I've done my extra year or two that I was going to do, and I'm gone.
And it still seems to be going on. I looked at the last labor report, and everyone is so stressed because you're working overtime and working harder because of the labor shortage. Older workers seem to still be saying, I'm done.
Yeah. So here's my bolt. So my lightning bolt, it struck me a few weeks ago. I was in Seattle, and I met with a state legislator in Seattle, and they handed me a piece of legislation, and it bolted me over. It's a piece of legislation that revises the way we look at criminal background checks in our country. And instead of something appearing after 30 years when you made that stupid mistake or choice in high school, it's actually pushed down way off your record so that if an employer needs a second look, that they can go back and look at it. But the first check wouldn't pull up anything that was over a certain number of period time that was so old. And also, it also had a relevancy factor to the job that you were going to be doing, which I thought was remarkable. Wouldn't that be great if you did something and it was totally not related at all to the industry sector you're trying to get involved in? I just think it makes a lot of sense, and we really need to do something on our criminal background systems that are happening in our country and what we're doing with them. So, Jeff Korzenik, thank you so much for being with us. Anson, it's been a wonderful episode. I'm really excited about waiting for this to come out. And Untapped Talent, make sure you get your copy. If you need one, just come find me speaking somewhere, and I'll have a bunch of them with me, or you can get online and just go purchase it. You've been listening to Behind Every Employer with Anson Green and Jeff Abramowitz, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye, folks.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Behind Every Employer podcast with your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. This podcast has been brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education and NGen, a career-focused virtual English language platform for organizations and employers working with immigrants and refugees. Listen to the Behind Every Employer podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and you can find us at coabe.org. If you'd like to reach Behind Every Employer podcast, you can do so at behindeveryemployer@coabe.org.